Hi, welcome to this interview with Marie Jo. I'm going to have her introduce herself, but today's video, we had intended this to be a live stream. However, with some technological challenges, we're going to make this a pre-recorded interview and there'll be timestamps so you can take your time watching this. And we'll definitely follow up with another live stream because it's something we can share with people who are looking to enhance how they build and creatively design their online learning experiences. So I'm so excited that I get to talk to Marie Jo today. She's out in Canada. She'll tell you a little bit more about her work. We're going to talk a little bit about games and where that fits in with our online learning experiences. Most of us have heard of all the different tools and software that you can use to build online learning experiences, but this is less of a software focused video and more about the actual design process and what does games do for our online learning experiences, what they do for our learners, and how they really support the learning experience. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your work? Because I know you have a very intriguing background. So, I'd love for people to know more about you.
Sure. So, hi, my name is Marie-Jo Leroux. I'm from Montreal, Canada, and I've had basically three careers. I started my career as an instructional designer and corporate trainer, especially in the utilities industry. And then around the year 2000, the video games industry exploded here in Montreal. And being a hobbyist game maker, I was hired as a video game producer. And I did that for 10 years. So I got to work with Marvel, Disney, and Ubisoft for 10 years. But at the end of that period, I kind of missed the world of education. So 8 years ago, I left video games and I started a studio that is dedicated to gamification of training. So we make e-learning programs using video games to make them more engaging and effective.
So, can you tell us more about your own experiences with games and how that helped you in your career and how you see that in your day to day experiences?
Well, I wouldn't say I gamify my everyday life, but definitely play a lot of games for inspiration. And as far as helping me in my career, as a hobbyist, trying to make games in the 80s and not knowing how to code, so failing, and also designing paper and pen games all throughout the 90s, I had no idea that that was going to lead to a career in games. And when I left games, I had no idea that that was going to allow me to start an e-learning company and stand out on the market. And I went out and I contacted a whole bunch of companies to offer these services in gamification of training. And to my great surprise, there was a lot of appetite for that. And I really thought I was going to have to do a lot of customer and market education about how great games are at teaching people, but there was quite an appetite for it. So that was a pleasant surprise. And I love the fact that in the e-learning industry, people are getting more and more game literate and using more and more complex mechanics to reach the learning objectives.
That's awesome. What kind of games inspired you?
Oh my. I play a lot of games to teach myself things. I used to do that a lot on the Commodore 64, and I play a lot on Sporkle and things like that. And I've even created games to teach myself things because I was just felt that it would be easier for me to just play through something. And of course, in the course of making the game, I learned quite a bit of it, but the memorization and everything comes with the repeated play. So I like a lot of management games, games where you have to manage resources and strategize when to use them and that sort of thing.
So I know we've talked about like playing games and like a lot of us think about like games such as board games and we think of like or maybe I think about also like Roblox and another like a game or I think about people who like to play Xbox. And I know you've mentioned a little bit about like pen and paper like games. Can you maybe share some of those games so that we can kind of show people that there's a wide range of games experiences rather than what we think of as like Xbox or maybe yeah.
Sure, sure. Well, the principles of gamification and good game design apply to pretty much any format, including classroom. So when I used to give my program as an in-person workshop before the pandemic, I used to just bring prototyping kits and people would just make games using pen and paper, even though they would eventually transfer them to e-learning. We would design them on the fly, very kind of quick and dirty to try them out and we play each other's games and see where the learner had difficulty understanding something or some power up was too powerful or something like that. So we use pen and paper a lot to prototype and to quickly test the game and quickly get buy-in in the workshop originally. And I still do that now because it helps me see new ideas as I'm playing my game in a very low tech format before I put it on screen.
That's really inspiring. It's really helpful because I think a lot of us get really caught up in the technology is so accessible. You can find a software for almost everything now. And so our natural instinct is to want to jump into what tools and what software, what programs can I use to build games. And it's good to know that you begin your process in a very like low tech way. So I want to kind of then start off with history and context because gamification and games and gamify are very much buzzwords. And I see a lot of people who come and ask me questions. I see a lot in job postings. And so what do you think is makes gamification or games or gamifying your course different than building like maybe an e-learning course that is less about the games, but more about building in the interactivity elements?
As far as the trend is concerned, it always makes me laugh when people say it's a new trend because we've been using games to teach each other for millennia. Snakes and Ladders was originally a serious game aimed at teaching people morality. If you landed on a square that had a sin or a vice, you went down. And if you landed on a square with a virtue, you went up a ladder. And at the top, there was nirvana, that was like perfection. And so that was a serious game, and it's thousands of years old. But as far as the more recent hype, I think it, the hype came up more like around 2010, maybe 2008, something like that. There's a really big appetite for it. And then there was like a disillusionment because everybody thought that gamification was going to save the world, and everybody kind of rushed in. And what was applied at the time was the easiest form of gamification, which is to convert everything into points and badges and really pointsify everything. And people got really, really quickly tired of that with the badge fatigue setting in, not just in training, but in a lot of different areas. I remember reading articles on Google and getting a badge for having read an article about hockey and being encouraged to read another one so I could get like the higher badge for hockey. But I was getting badges everywhere, including on LinkedIn. So nobody cared after a while because we had so many badges everywhere. So there was disillusionment. And I think now people are understanding that beyond that, games can teach us a lot about how to be memorable, how to grab attention, and how to build skill in a durable way. So we've been over the hype and the disillusionment, and now I think that we're heading towards balance.
That's a great segue into the next question is how does gamification work alongside what we see as the badges and the points or the leaderboard that's sometimes implemented into e-learning as a way to support learners?
Well, I think it's all part of gamification. There are debates about what is gamification, what isn't it, and that sort of thing. And I try not to get into that too much because those debates about nomenclature, they only interest practitioners like me and gamification nerds like me. But what's important to say an e-learning designer is going to be effective. Is what I'm putting in to engage the learner going to be a distraction, or is it going to actually help move them forward towards the learning objectives? So it's all gamification, but I would say the lighter type of gamification, what I call motivational gamification, can work. It's just that you have to have the right expectations. If people just put in badges and expect it to be as engaging as Super Mario, they're in for a disappointment. It can help a little bit, it can be a nice surprise, but I believe that learners and audiences are becoming more and more demanding for what engages them as we get more and more options to entertain ourselves, and audiences are getting more sophisticated. They're demanding more than just that. Luckily, games offer a whole bunch more than just badges.
Yeah, that's really great. Building a course has become more than just the role of e-learning designers or e-learning folks or instructional designers. We're seeing a trend where entrepreneurs are looking to create courses and create learning experiences as a way to share their knowledge, scale their business. And so, how would you suggest someone who's interested in this topic of gamification and hearing all about like points and badges, use that in conjunction with what they built to really have a little bit of gamification as a beginning kind of introduction for their students?
Well, when you want to gamify your training, if you want it to be effective, I believe that the first skill you should have is good instructional design skills, or at least you should know what your training is aiming towards, what people should be able to do when they finish it, and what questions should they be able to answer. Notice I don't say what should they know, but what questions should they be able to answer, because I want them to have active verbs to think about when it comes to what is it that I want to enable the learner to do. And whatever the activities of your game or your gamified activities are should closely match what it is that the people should be able to do by the end of the course. So I would say definitely analyze your content, subtract what's not necessary, set your learning objectives well, which is at the base of any good instructional design. So that's step one. Then I would have them design activities where the learner is actually doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing at the end of the course. Of course, what you want to do is you want to start easy. The principle that we usually use is we isolate every single thing. So the first thing that they need to learn, we'll create an activity where the person will figure out for themselves what you want them to know. And then once they figure that out, we get them to practice it at an increasingly challenging level. Let's use an example. Say I'm training people to answer questions about gardening on a gardening hotline, okay, for a fertilizer company or something. Maybe I'll have them answer questions in the game, but one of the hallmarks of success in this job is doing it quickly. So accessing the information quickly in your head. So what we could do in order to increase the level of challenge is just give them less and less time or more and more points for a quick answer. Because in that particular case, speed is relevant. It's maybe not relevant if you're just teaching people to garden, because it doesn't matter how long it takes to pick the right soil, but on the phone it might be. So you really want to look at in what context will this information and this skill be used, and try to match that to the activity that you're doing. So yes, you are doing a simulation, but it doesn't have to be a completely real world simulation, as long as the skill is the same. And then you increase the level of challenge. And once they've really mastered it, then you can bring something else in and you combine the two. So really we introduce and then we let them practice in a safe space, and then we combine it with something new. And we go on like that. So that's one way that I would have them develop a gamified approach to letting the learner practice. It also makes the learner more active. Think about Duolingo, for example. Duolingo never has a part where it's teaching you something, where it's saying this is a cat in Japanese, this is a dog in Japanese. It's constantly asking you questions, but it's asking them in a way that you can guess. It's going to give you 3 words that you already know and a new one, and then you'll absorb that one, and so on and so forth. So we're scaffolding new information into the known or guessable information always.
Okay, cool. And we talked a little bit about the low tech, like you gave us an example. We've seen like games range into what we call game shows. I've seen people build escape rooms, and I've seen people build a dice kind of game. If you're looking at these types of activities and you're like excited and you're curious, how can someone begin to take these ideas and examples that they see outside and bring them into their course? Let's say, like, your example of a gardening course, how would you take the elements of games and build that into a gardening course?
A very important thing to remember is that gamification is a spectrum. I say that all of these activities fall under the umbrella of gamification, but you don't need all of them. Say, for example, we take a caricature of an e-learning course where you have info dump test. Maybe you don't have a lot of time or a lot of budget or want to gamify a little bit. What you can do is just gamify your knowledge checks, as opposed to building an entire simulation of choosing the right soil, the right water, the right amount of light, and then seeing the plant thrive or die. Now, that would be a complex simulation with a lot of variables going into what happens to the plant. That's great, but you don't need to do that. You can also just gamify the knowledge check. Some people use templates from existing games, what I call the universally applicable games, the Jeopardies, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, that sort of thing. You can certainly do that, but This is one of the things I see audiences getting a little bit of fatigue, quiz fatigue, and badge fatigue. Yes, and if possible, I would encourage people to develop something that's more specific to their content. Jeopardy, love Jeopardy, but Jeopardy is applicable to everything, which is great. But at the same time, if you can build a game where the structure of the game itself mimics the structure of your content, that will give the learner an intuitive understanding of your content on top of what you're teaching them.
Can you tell us like something that you have worked on that can help us connect this better?
For some reason, when I started the company, I wasn't planning on this, but a lot of the appetite for gamified training came from the medical education sector, continuing medical education.
Right.
So there was a lot of virtual patient simulators where you can try different diagnostic tools and therapies with different virtual patients. And if you make a mistake, it's not as bad as if you make a mistake on a real person. So there's a lot of simulation of that, either from branching scenario kind of things, all the way to more complex simulations where you're making more than one decision and seeing the interactions of that. So this person, maybe it's somebody who has a specific comorbidity or a specific kind of condition, and you try different combinations of therapies and seeing how they interact. So that was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. For course creators, we don't necessarily have an instructional designer on our team. We're new to all this. What's the first step for them to get a little bit of experience and knowledge so that they can maybe attempt to do some of this on themselves? Most course creators aren't instructional designers, and they want to bring this gamification or gamify their course, but they're not an instructional designer. They hear like all these different words and terminologies, and they're not sure where to begin.
A quick tip I could give somebody is definitely that I learned in games was we always wanted people to be able to progress even if they have 5 minutes. So I have 5 minutes before my meeting, I can open up the game and make some progress. So I try to keep my videos short. That's the first thing. And a short video and then practice. Practice through an activity like storyline or a quiz at the very least, but something interactive. Then if you're making a video-based course, with video, there isn't a lot of opportunities for the learner to do stuff while they're being taught. And so it's a lot less of an active method. But one way to do that is to put in a lot of activities, either through workbooks or I interject storyline into my course. After every 5 minutes, they get to practice something. Well, my course is about gamification. So when I'm talking about a specific game mechanic, I want them to be able to play it immediately after. So storyline allows me that. But if you're not making a course about that, at the very least, give them a little something interactive to do just so that they can be active as much as possible. And the reason why I keep my videos short is so that even if they don't have a lot of time, they can feel like they've made progress.
That's really helpful. I think that would be great for courses that are asynchronous, but do you have an example? I've also seen maybe some courses that are hybrid where the instructor-led portion, like they've done like a treasure hunt, not using storyline, just a very informal, like they design the board game and then they talk you through, they talk the participants through the game and then kind of get you to participate in that way.
One way I could think about getting people to interact with each other is make your content into some puzzle that they have to figure out. Give each one a different bit of the answer. Get them to put it together and interact with each other. And maybe something like that could get them to interact. We know that when you're learning with other people and you're cooperating with other people, it makes you learn more simply because hearing somebody else's way of thinking about the content is a form of repetition of the way you think about it, the way I think about it. It's a form of repetition that helps people crystallize the learning in their brain. So just hearing the instructor say it once and then hearing somebody else's way of understanding it and somebody else's helps that make learning more solid. So I might get people to interact with each other and figure it out by giving each a bit of the key. One idea like that.
That's great. That's really fun. I can see that would really encourage and want someone to participate more than just kind of sit and listen to someone talk through a PowerPoint. Could someone live deliver like an interaction and game element without necessarily having to create the actual game, but maybe use a tool out there to support them?
Yeah, that would be a good idea too, to not necessarily have it in the course platform itself, but maybe some other tool that the instructor has, where some other tool where the instructor has just developed an exercise for everybody to do that they can send a link to for sure.
We've heard a lot about like interaction and interactivity and gamification. Do you see a difference in the terminology? Should we like stick to like gamification, gamifying, or should we stick with interactivity to reflect the broad spectrum?
Well, like I said, I try not to get into those debates because they're really boring for most people who don't live their life in gamification. I would say that the difference between interactivity for me is I do something, I input something, I write something on my keyboard or I click somewhere and there's a response. That's interactivity.
Yeah.
Gamification is more like there's a challenge to it. And that's why games are engaging in the first place. If we can start with that, actually. We've known for a really long time that if you put a course in the form of a game, oftentimes it will increase the engagement and the result. So we've known this. Studies came out in the early 90s with that stuff, but only about for the past 10 years have people really been looking inside what's happening in your brain while you're playing a game and why is it that it makes the learning more effective. And what they found is that it seems to have to do with the uncertainty of a reward. Now, think about a cat. This is my favorite example, but think about a cat who's about to pounce on a butterfly and he crouches down and his eyes go really, really wide. That state of focus is what happens when you're in front of a reward you want, but you're not sure you're going to get, right? And in that state of focus, studies show it's early days still, but studies show we're less vulnerable to distraction, but also our brain seems to be more plastic. We're making new connections faster. And so the idea of gamification is to give you a challenge that you're not sure you're going to succeed at. And while you're in that state of focus, present information that's actually useful so that you'll learn it more. The difference between interactivity and gamification for me is that in gamification, you have some that you could achieve if you stretch yourself a little bit, but you're not sure you will. If you're sure you're going to make it, then it's not challenging and it's boring. If you're sure you're going to fail, that's also boring or at least frustrating and you're going to let go. So it's really about challenging people in a way that makes them have to think about it, but is achievable at their level. So
Ah,
that's the difference for me.
well, that's good. It helps because it's important to not get caught up in the buzzwords, but think about the results that we want to offer our students. It can be very overwhelming and challenging, and they don't necessarily have the resources or budget, but maybe we could give them some kind of overview.
I want to repeat that it's a spectrum. So choose to do a little bit of gamification just for a little bit of extra engagement and that extra boost, or you can do the full-on game-based learning. The point is, if you don't have a lot of time, a lot of budget, a lot of experience or anything, you just want to do a little bit, you can pick where you think it's going to be the most effective or where you are getting feedback, maybe where people are having more trouble understanding something or just the spectrum for me goes something like this. You have your challenges, the actual activities that you have the person go through, which approach more and more, which are organized in an increasingly complex way so that they approach more and more the final skill that you want the person to have. That is high effort, high investment gamification. Usually it requires more on the part of the designer, but it's most effective, in my opinion. Then you have adding incentives. On top of these activities, you can have your points, badges, leaderboards, rewards, power-ups, etc. It's a universally applicable, effective, in my opinion, than working with the activities, but it won't hurt. And it might give somebody a little hit of dopamine that they need at that point. On top of that, the next step on top of that to me is everything I call the wrapper. So that's working on stuff like interface, presentation, making sure that the rules of your activities or your game are intuitive so that to make sure that the person understands exactly what they need to do very quickly. So working on all those elements of presentation to make sure that the person doesn't expend any cognitive load on understanding what they need to do. Maybe themes, stories, scenarios, that sort of thing. That's all, to me, that's all wrapper. That would be the thing I would do last once I have everything else well packaged. So typically people will go for motivational mechanics because that doesn't require a huge amount of effort.
Yeah. That's really cool. So I think that really gives us an overview of like, doesn't have to be like an escape room. It doesn't have to be a scenario. It could be as simple as like a knowledge check, or it could be as simple as just building in that kind of interaction.
Yeah, definitely. And the escape rooms are great, especially when you have a lot of information to impart. But again, are you teaching people to look through rooms to find things, or are you teaching them your content? You have to be careful about how much effort and how much cognitive load they're going to spend trying to open doors.
Yeah, that's
But I
great.
love escape rooms.
Oh, you love escape room.
The game has to be appropriate to your content. And I really believe strongly in that. And I only show that stuff on YouTube because there I can put it in context.
I think the more important thing is match it to the content. You have to match it to who it's for. You have to know what your client or what your audience's needs are and what they're trying to accomplish. But don't just build the escape room because it's cool and fun without sort of an awareness of. But we can think about like Jeopardy as a quiz is accessible to everyone.
There are downsides to
There are
that, right? Yeah. Well, for one thing, I've had clients say, we would like to gamify our training, but please can it not be a Jeopardy, another Jeopardy? So there's already the novelty is wearing off, I'm hearing. There's also the fact that if you're building a gamified training program custom, then you can have its own structure, the game structure itself mimic the structure of your content. And so that makes it easier and more intuitive for the learner to understand it. I'll give you an example. There's this game called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I think, I'm not sure, that teaches you about how to get out of the rat race and start investing and get wealthier. And I don't know if his message is correct or incorrect, but you start the game going around and around and around in a circle on a board game. It's a board game. And when you have enough money to start investing, you break out of that and then you go on a line. And I thought that was brilliant because the structure of the game itself mimics his message, the message that he's trying to impart. And you can only do that when you make a kind of a custom game based on your content. That's when your game can become a mnemonic for what you're trying to say. But I realize not everyone is interested in making a game from scratch custom, but really try to find one that can have more bridges between your content in itself than
right.
just yeah.
So that makes sense. Like the rat race, the idea of the rich dad poor dad is like when you can reach the first milestone, then you've broken out of that pattern and you're able to complete a different experience that really matches the new wealth narrative that they're trying to help you achieve.
Yeah, exactly. So like I said, I don't know if I agree with his message or whatever, but at least he's built a game based on his content for sure.
That's
Or his
awesome.
message. Yeah.
Okay, so this has been really, really helpful. I really appreciate your time. And then if you are all interested in learning more about her work, I'll put a link in the description in the video to your course that you will be teaching in the fall, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you tell us about the course, like how it's structured, who it's for, what? Yeah.
So it's called the Effective Gamification Framework, and it helps learning designers, especially e-learning designers, create fresh and innovative training through a step-by-step method. And the idea is to put in fun and engagement in your e-learning courses, but especially effective, fun and engaging mechanics. So effectiveness is at the core of this course's concern with gamification.
And I want to make sure people know that this course is not a storyline course, right?
It's not based on any one tool, although you will use Storyline to build your prototypes. People are invited to create prototypes as they go through the process of gamification and exchange prototypes and critique. We'll critique each other's prototypes, but I do not teach you how to use Storyline.
Okay, yeah, that's important.
Design course.
If you are interested in learning storyline to build games, that is something else you have to find later on, or you have to hire an instructional designer. Thank you so much for your time.